Welcome to the Eye Opener. I'm your host, Michael Lewis. New York Governor Kathy Hochul reported more COVID-19 deaths on her first day in office. But can we tell how many are from the nursing homes? A top Canadian virology lab sent deadly viruses to the Wuhan Institute of Virology months ahead of the pandemic. An American scientist was the first to discover the presence of one of those viruses in the early samples of COVID-19 from Wuhan. Two congressmen secretly flew to the Kabul airport, seeking evidence to press Biden to extend the evacuation deadline. Upon seeing the desperate situation, they said no matter what we do, it's impossible to get everyone out by August 31st. U.S. soldiers started turning back more Afghans as the deadline looms. Some private flights had to unfortunately take off with a large number of empty seats. Okay, my friends, let's take a closer look together. New York Governor Kathy Hochul added 12,000 more deaths in the state from COVID-19 on her first day in office. New York is now reporting a death toll of about 55,000 as opposed to the 43,000 reported on Andrew Cuomo's last day, August 23rd. The adjustment seems to be fulfilling the new governor's promise of more government transparency. Hochul said on MSNBC, "We're now releasing more data than had been released before publicly. So people know the nursing home deaths and the hospital deaths are consistent with what's being displayed by the CDC. There's a lot of things that weren't happening, and I'm going to make them happen. Transparency will be the hallmark of my administration." But Hochul didn't say how many of those extra 12,000 deaths are from nursing homes. In fact, her explanation of the much higher death toll was due to the discrepancy between presumed and confirmed deaths. The count used by Cuomo allegedly only included laboratory-confirmed COVID-19 deaths tracked through a state system that covers data from hospitals, nursing home, and adult care facilities. So people who died at home, in prison, and or in hospice were excluded. People who likely died of COVID but never tested positive were also excluded. All these are outside of the state tracking system and are considered presumed COVID deaths. In addition, Cuomo was accused of writing off all nursing home patients if they died after being transferred to hospitals. The select coronavirus statistics, of course, help maintain Cuomo's image as a pandemic leader. Hochul said her administration now uses numbers from the CDC to account for the presumed deaths. But again, how many of those 12,000 deaths are confirmed COVID-19 deaths and are from nursing homes? This part has yet to be made transparent. The U.S. military is ordered to immediately begin full vaccination against COVID-19. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin on Wednesday moved up his earlier plan, which calls for service members to get vaccinated by September 15th. Austin told his department heads to impose ambitious timelines for implementation. All troops are now required to get the FDA-approved Pfizer shot. The Department of Defense, as the world's largest employer with over 1.4 million active duty service members, which includes soldiers, Marines, sailors, airmen, and National Guardsmen. Approximately 68% of the force has been fully vaccinated, but this number varies greatly by branch. The Navy has the highest full vaccination rate at 73%, while the Army has the lowest at just 40%. Governments around the world are rolling out vaccine mandates despite the great controversy. However, a grassroots human rights group recently defeated a mandatory vaccination requirement for its province in Ecuador. The Emergency Operations Committee, EOC, is the country's crisis response department. On July 6, the EOC issued a decree mandating COVID-19 vaccines for Loja residents over the age of 16, and the deadline was August 9th. Loja is a relatively small province with about 500,000 people. The decree came as a shock to many Ecuadorians. To enter banks, restaurants, government buildings, and other places of daily commerce, residents would have to prove their vaccination status. Nick Vassi, the founder of Human Rights Ecuador, reacted immediately. Vassi believes the mandate violates human rights and he stands for medical freedom. Vassi's lawyers filed an injunction against the EOC at the end of July and secured a meeting with Loja's ombudsman 6 days before the decree went into effect. It was a critical and timely step. The provincial ombudsman has the authority to override the state-level department. As a result, on August 5th, Loja's ombudsman dismissed the vaccine mandate for the province, citing the measure was unconstitutional. It was a stunning victory that Vassi achieved for the people. Actions are bigger than words. When you feel strongly about something, do what you know is right. The result may just surprise you. The National Microbiology Laboratory, also known as NML, in Winnipeg, Manitoba, is Canada's only level 4 lab. It had connections with the Wuhan Institute of Virology before the pandemic. Samples from early Wuhan coronavirus patients show the presence of a genetically modified Henipah virus. And the Henipah virus was one of the 2 types of viruses the NML sent to the Wuhan lab in March 2019. The evidence was first discovered by an American scientist, Dr. Steve Quay, formerly a faculty member at the Stanford University School of Medicine. Quay looked at COVID-19 samples from December 2019 submitted by scientists at the WIV. While most scientists were interested in examining the genome of SARS-CoV-2, Quay wanted to see what else the samples had. Quay collaborated with a few other scientists, and they started fishing inside for weird things. In addition to the likely contamination from different experiments in the Wuhan lab making their way into the SARS-CoV-2 samples, Quay discovered genetic manipulation of the Nipah virus. Nipah is one type of bat-borne Henipah virus that causes infection in humans and animals. It's a disease more deadly than Ebola. Joe Wong, the president of NTD Television Canada, who formerly spearheaded a vaccine development program for SARS in Toronto, said he was able to replicate Quay's findings on the Nipah virus. Wong said the genetic manipulation of the pathogen was likely for vaccine development. The Winnipeg lab was at the center of controversy in 2019. 2 Chinese-born scientists, Xiangguang Qiu and her husband, Keiding Qiang, both working at NML, shipped Henipah and Ebola viruses to the Wuhan lab in March that year. 4 months later, along with their students from China, they were all kicked out of NML over what's described as a possible policy breach. The Liberal government, led by Justin Trudeau, refuses to release more details on the termination, citing national security and privacy concerns. It's not clear whether the firing was due to the virus shipment to China, but Qiu's role at Canada's only level 4 lab has been dubious. During her time at the Winnipeg lab, Qiu traveled several times to the WIV, allegedly helping train people there on level 4 safety. We know that the Wuhan lab is closely tied to the Chinese military. Canadian newspaper The Globe and Mail reported that scientists at NML have been collaborating with Chinese military researchers on deadly pathogens. One Chinese military researcher even worked at NML for a period of time. Members of Parliament have pressed the NML why it allowed such a dangerous shipment of samples and whether it knew if the Wuhan lab performs any gain-of-function research. The lab's scientific director general replied during a parliamentary meeting that they only sent the virus after receiving assurance that no gain-of-function procedures would take place. Well, who assured them? What was the assurance? Did the lab just rely on the WIV's or the CCP's empty words? Dr. Fauci in the United States gave the same answer, that the NIH shall not fund the gain-of-function research. But no matter how affirmative or indignant Fauci was, a verbal denial means nothing. It should be common sense that the words from the state-run Chinese lab can't be trusted. Moving to the Afghan crisis, security threats at the Kabul International Airport have escalated. The airport has been facing the threat of ISIS attacks. Last night, the United States, the UK, and Australia warned that citizens must stay away from the airport. The State Department issued the alert around 7 p.m., telling people at the gates of the airport to leave immediately. The UK updated its travel advisory for Afghanistan around 10 p.m., saying there is an ongoing and high threat of a terrorist attack at the airport. It also advises if people can leave the country safely by other means, they should do so immediately. As this August 31st deadline fast approaches, the high threat of terrorist attacks is disrupting the evacuation effort. Aid organizations have been told that evacuation flights won't continue past Friday, as the U.S. military will need the remaining days to remove its own equipment and withdraw its troops. At the same time, private rescue efforts started to have major setbacks. Last week, Washington-based development firm Sayara International made plans to take 1,000 Afghan refugees and allies to Uganda. Sayara chartered 3 planes for the operation, but its rescue mission didn't turn out as planned. Marines at the airport gates turned back many Afghans. One Ugandan woman had to crawl through a sewage pipe to get into the airport. But time is running out. On Tuesday night, after trying unsuccessfully for days to get enough people to board the flight, the 345-seat plane took off with only 50 passengers. George Abiy Habib, co-founder of the organization, said, "We can't expect everyone to crawl through a sewer pipe to safety. The window is closing." The same thing happened to a charter flight heading for Ukraine last Sunday. 40 at-risk Afghan women were brought to the airport gates with balloons that said Ukraine on them for easy identification, but U.S. troops denied their entrance. The flight, which had been waiting for the group of women for 2 days, flew out of Kabul without them. 70 of the 240 seats were empty. And coming up, we finally get numbers from Secretary of State Antony Blinken on how many Americans are still in Afghanistan. 2 congressmen make the trip to Afghanistan, and women are warned to stay indoors in Afghanistan. But before we continue, if you like our program, please hit the like button and subscribe. It'll force the algorithm to share the video to potentially thousands of people. If you want to support the Eye Opener, please consider donating to the show or purchasing a mug that matters. You can find the link in the description below, and as always, your support is greatly appreciated. Salute. How many Americans are still stuck in Afghanistan? Secretary of State Antony Blinken gave the numbers yesterday. On August 14th, the start of the evacuation, there were 6,000 Americans who wanted to leave the country. Since then, about 4,500 U.S. citizens have been evacuated, so there are about 1,500 left. Blinken said officials have been in direct contact with about 500 Americans to guide them safely to the airport. For the remaining 1,000, the State Department is, quote, aggressively reaching out to them through phone, email, and text messages to check on their status and help them leave. But some doubt the numbers. The figure of 6,000 Americans wanting to leave the country is significantly lower than the Biden administration's previous estimate of 10,000 to 15,000 Americans. It's also much lower than estimates from other sources. Hours before Blinken gave his speech, a White House correspondent from Fox said a source from the State Department told her there were about 4,100 Americans still trapped. However, shortly after, the source said it misspoke and the 4,100 was incorrect. Democrat Representative Seth Moulton and Republican Peter Meijer shocked Washington as they made an unannounced trip to the Kabul airport on Tuesday. 3 officials familiar with their flight said the State Department, Defense Department, and the White House were furious because it wasn't a coordinated effort. But in a joint statement released after the trip, the 2 congressmen said, as members of Congress, they have a duty to provide oversight on the executive branch. And they made sure they left on a chartered flight with empty seats, not to take seats for evacuees. Both Moulton and Meijer are military veterans with experience in the region. Like most veterans, their goal was to push Biden to extend the evacuation deadline. After talking with commanders on the ground and seeing the situation at the airport, it became obvious to them the current deadline is not realistic. Moulton said, because we started the evacuation so late that no matter what we do, we won't get everyone out on time, even by September 11th. Sadly and frustratingly, getting our people out depends on maintaining the current bizarre relationship with the Taliban. What is the Taliban doing beyond the airport gates? The group is warning employed Afghan women not to show up to work and stay indoors because its members need to get trained on how to deal with women. The Taliban spokesman told reporters their security forces are not trained in how to deal with women, how to speak to women. Until that happens, they ask women to stay home. When the Taliban ruled the country from 1996 to 2001, women were not allowed to go to work or school, could only leave their homes with a male escort, and were required to wear a head-to-toe covering. It shouldn't surprise anyone that Taliban fighters have little respect for women, but the extent of their disrespect is close to ignorance. Former Afghan judge Nesla Iobi told Sky News that last week a Taliban fighter allegedly set a woman on fire for bad cooking, while other young women are reportedly being forced into sex slavery and shipped into neighboring countries in coffins. Iobi added, they are also forced families to marry their young daughters to Taliban fighters. I don't see where is the promise that they think women should be going to work when we are seeing all of these atrocities. The Taliban certainly won't form and isn't capable of forming a normal government in Afghanistan. Let's all be clear and sober about this. The U.S. must not rely on the Taliban's promise or stance to create an evacuation plan to rescue and bring home every American who's trapped. And that's it for today, my friends. Check out the playlist right here for more eye-opening content. You can join me in the Eye Opener Telegram chat room and follow me on Newmaker, Gab, Parler, and Getter. Now don't forget, please sign up to the email list so that we can stay in touch. I'd like to thank you all, and I'll see you next time.